The air inside Nexus Prime trade station smelled like a mix of oil, metal, and the strange scents of 100 different alien species. Lieutenant Jake Morrison walked through the crowded marketplace, his hand resting on his weapon. Next to him, Maya Collins carried a small silver case that held secrets worth more than most planets. Maya was only 19 years old, but she had been chosen for this job because she was smart and brave. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her green eyes looked around at all the strange aliens with curiosity instead of fear. Jake liked that about her. Most people would be scared in a place like this. The marketplace was huge, with metal walls that stretched up so high you could not see the ceiling. Lights hung down like stars, casting colorful shadows on the crowds below. Aliens of every shape and size moved through the narrow paths between the shops. Some had scales, some had fur, and some looked like they were made of rocks or metal. Jake had been to Nexus Prime many times before. It was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where all species could trade without fighting. Most of the time it worked. But Jake knew that peace was a thin thing, and it could break easily. They walked past a shop that sold glowing crystals from the Andor system. Maya stopped to look at one that was purple and blue, swirling like a tiny storm trapped in glass. The alien shopkeeper, who had 6 arms and looked like a giant spider, clicked at her in a friendly way. "It is beautiful," Maya said to Jake. "I have never seen anything like it." Jake smiled. "The galaxy is full of beautiful things, and dangerous ones too. We need to keep moving." Maya nodded and stepped away from the crystal shop. As she turned, she bumped into something very large and very solid. She looked up and up until she saw a face that made her blood run cold. The creature standing in front of her was 7 feet tall and covered in dark green scales that looked like armor. His arms were thick as tree trunks, and his hands ended in claws that could cut through steel. Yellow eyes stared down at her with pure hatred. This was a Zenthari warrior, and Maya had just made a very big mistake. The Zenthari were known throughout the galaxy as killers. They hired themselves out to anyone who could pay, and they did not care who got hurt. They believed that other species were weak and stupid, good only for serving the strong. And now Maya had touched one of them. "Soft-skin filth," the Zenthari growled in a voice like grinding stone. His name was Kethvar, though Maya did not know this yet. All she knew was that she was in terrible danger. "I am sorry," Maya said quickly. "I did not mean to bump into you." Jake stepped forward, putting himself between Maya and the alien warrior. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, but next to the Zenthari he looked small. "There is no problem here," Jake said in a calm voice. "It was an accident." Kethvar looked at Jake like he was an insect. "You dare speak to a Zenthari warrior? Human? Your kind are nothing but weak meat that should know its place." Other aliens in the marketplace began to notice what was happening. They moved away, creating a circle of empty space around the 3 figures. No one wanted to get involved in a fight with a Zenthari warrior. These creatures could tear a person apart with their bare hands. Maya felt her heart beating fast. She had trained for dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared her for this. The hatred in the alien's eyes was like looking into fire. She knew that he wanted to hurt her, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. "We will leave now," Jake said, reaching slowly for Maya's arm. "No one needs to get hurt." But Kethvar was not interested in letting them go. He had been insulted by a weak human female, and his pride demanded blood. In Zenthari culture, being touched by a lesser species was a grave offense. The only way to restore his honor was through violence. "The soft skin will pay for her disrespect," Kethvar snarled. He raised his massive hand, claws extended. Maya saw the blow coming but could not move fast enough to avoid it. The Zenthari's hand hit her across the face with the force of a hammer. The sound echoed through the marketplace like a gunshot. Maya flew backward, blood streaming from her nose and mouth, and crashed into a nearby fruit stand. Alien fruits rolled everywhere, their bright colors mixing with the red of her blood. The marketplace went completely silent. Every alien stopped what they were doing to stare at what had just happened. A Xanthari warrior had just struck down a human female in front of everyone. They all expected her to be dead, or at least broken beyond repair. But Maya was not dead. Slowly, very slowly, she began to push herself up from the wreckage of the fruit stand. Blood ran down her face and her left eye was already swelling shut, but she was alive. More than that, she was trying to stand up. Kethvar stared in surprise. The blow he had delivered should have killed any human. At the very least, it should have left them broken and helpless on the ground. But this small female was getting back to her feet, and there was no fear in her remaining good eye. There was only anger. That was when Jake Morrison stopped being a professional soldier and became something much more dangerous. The change happened in less than a second. One moment he was Lieutenant Morrison, a man trained to follow orders and keep the peace. The next moment he was a human male who had just watched someone hurt a person under his protection. The transformation was so complete that several aliens near him actually stepped back in fear. Jake did not make a sound as he moved. He simply exploded forward like a missile, covering the distance between himself and Kethvar in the blink of an eye. The Xanthari warrior had time to look surprised before Jake hit him with the full force of a human being who had decided that someone needed to pay for what they had done. The impact sent both of them crashing through a nearby stall that sold metal tools. The sound of breaking metal and alien shouts filled the air. Jake and Kethvar rolled across the ground, fighting for position, smashing everything in their path. Kethvar was stronger than Jake. There was no question about that. His claws could cut through armor and his scales could stop most weapons. But Jake had something that the alien did not expect. He had the fury of a human being who had watched an innocent person get hurt, and that fury burned like a star. Jake grabbed a broken piece of metal from the destroyed stall and drove it toward Kethvar's throat. The Xanthari caught his wrist just in time, his claws digging deep into Jake's arm. Blood flowed freely, but Jake did not seem to notice. He just pressed harder, trying to drive the makeshift weapon home. The two fighters crashed through another stall, this one selling cloth from distant worlds. Bright fabrics wrapped around them as they fought, making it hard to see who was winning. But the sounds coming from the tangle of cloth were not the sounds of a quick victory for the Xanthari warrior. They were the sounds of a real fight, brutal and desperate. Other aliens in the marketplace watched in shock. They had never seen a human fight like this before. Most species would have backed down from a Xanthari warrior, or died quickly if they were foolish enough to attack. But this human just kept fighting, no matter how much damage he took. Maya pulled herself fully to her feet, wiping blood from her face. Through her swollen eye, she could see Jake and the alien warrior destroying everything around them as they fought. She wanted to help, but she knew she would only get in the way. All she could do was watch and hope that Jake could survive long enough for help to arrive. The fight between Jake and Kethvar had now destroyed 5 different market stalls. Broken glass, twisted metal, and scattered goods covered the ground around them. Other aliens pressed closer to watch, but none dared to interfere. Fighting a Xanthari warrior was considered suicide by most species in the galaxy. Jake rolled away from Kethvar's claws and grabbed a heavy metal bar from the wreckage around them. The Xanthari warrior was bleeding from several cuts on his arms and face, but he was far from defeated. His yellow eyes burned with rage as he realized this human was not going to die quickly. "You fight well for weak meat," Kethvar snarled, wiping green blood from his mouth, "but you will still die." Jake did not waste time with words. He swung the metal bar at Kethvar's head with all his strength. The Xanthari blocked the attack with his armored forearm, but the impact made him stumble backward. Jake pressed his advantage, striking again and again, each blow ringing like a bell as metal met scale. The crowd of aliens watching grew larger. Word was spreading through the station that a human was actually fighting a Xanthari warrior, and not losing immediately. Some had never seen a human fight before. They had heard humans were weak creatures who relied on tools and tricks instead of natural strength. But Jake was changing their minds about that. Blood streamed down his face from several deep cuts, and his left arm hung at an odd angle where Kethvar had struck him. Yet he kept fighting with a fury that shocked everyone watching. When the metal bar broke in half from repeated impacts, Jake simply used the sharp end as a spear. Kethvar caught the makeshift spear just inches from his throat, his claws wrapping around the metal. The two fighters strained against each other, muscles bulging with effort. Jake was smaller and lighter, but his determination seemed to give him strength beyond his size. "Why do you fight so hard for one weak female?" Kethvar gasped, confused by Jake's behavior. "She means nothing." Jake's answer came not in words but in action. He suddenly shifted his weight and drove his knee up into Kethavar's stomach. The Xanthari doubled over in pain, and Jake brought the broken end of his weapon down on the alien's back with crushing force. Kethavar roared in pain and anger. He spun around and backhanded Jake across the marketplace. Jake flew through the air and crashed into a wall, leaving a dent in the metal. For a moment he did not move, and the watching aliens thought the fight was finally over. Then Jake pushed himself up with his good arm and spat blood on the ground. His eyes never left Kethvar's face. "She is under my protection," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "And nobody hurts someone under my protection." Those words sent a chill through the alien crowd. They were beginning to understand that this was not just a fight between two individuals. This was something deeper, something that touched the very core of what it meant to be human. Maya watched from where she stood near the ruined fruit stall, her heart pounding with fear and something else she could not name. She had known Jake was a good soldier, but she had never seen him like this. The calm, professional man she knew was gone, replaced by something primal and dangerous. Kethvar advanced on Jake again, moving more carefully now. The human had proven he was not easy prey, and the Xanthari warrior was starting to feel real pain from his injuries. One of his ribs was cracked, and cuts on his arms burned like fire. Jake waited until the alien was close, then grabbed a handful of broken glass from the ground and flung it at Kethvar's eyes. The Xanthari threw up his arms to protect his face, and Jake used that moment to tackle him around the waist. They both went down hard, rolling across the debris-covered floor. The watching aliens gasped as Jake managed to get behind Kethvar and wrap his arm around the warrior's thick neck. It should have been impossible for a human to hold a Xanthari in such a position, but Jake's determination seemed to make the impossible happen. Kethvar thrashed wildly, his claws reaching over his shoulder to try to slash Jake's face. One claw found its mark, opening a deep cut from Jake's temple to his jaw. But Jake only tightened his grip, cutting off the alien's air supply. "Give up," Jake whispered in Kethvar's ear. "Give up, or I will squeeze until your neck breaks." For the first time in his life, Kethvar felt real fear. He was a proud warrior who had never been defeated in combat. But this human was slowly strangling him, and there seemed to be nothing he could do about it. His vision began to blur as oxygen failed to reach his brain. That was when the sound of marching boots echoed through the marketplace. A squad of human Marines in full combat armor jogged through the crowd, their weapons ready. Leading them was a woman with short black hair and captain's bars on her uniform. Her name was Lisa Chen, and she commanded the human cruiser Defender. "Stand down, Lieutenant," Captain Chen ordered as she approached the two fighters. "We will handle this from here." Jake looked up at his superior officer, his face streaked with blood and sweat. For a moment it seemed like he might not obey the order. The fury in his eyes was still burning bright, and Kethvar was still struggling weakly in his grip. "He hit Maya," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "He hit her, and he was going to do worse." Captain Chen's expression darkened as she looked over at Maya, who was still standing near the destroyed fruit stall with blood on her face. The captain had daughters of her own back on Earth, and the sight of an injured young woman made her own anger rise. "I can see that," Chen said coldly. "But if you kill him now, it will cause a diplomatic incident. Let him go, Jake. That is an order." Slowly, reluctantly, Jake released his grip on Kethvar's neck. The Xanthari warrior collapsed to the ground, gasping for air and holding his throat. He looked up at the circle of human Marines surrounding him, and for the first time he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Jake stood up slowly, favoring his injured arm. Captain Chen walked over to him and spoke quietly so only he could hear. "You did good, Lieutenant, but this is bigger than just one fight now." Jake looked around at the crowd of aliens watching them. Word of the fight was already spreading through the station's communication networks. Within hours, every species in the galaxy would know that a human had fought a Xanthari warrior to protect an injured woman. Captain Chen turned to address Kethvar, who was still on the ground. She spoke in fluent Xanthari, her words carrying the formal tones of military protocol. "Warrior Kethvar of the Xanthari clans," she said, "you have committed an act of violence against a human civilian under the protection of the Terran Defense Corps. By the laws of this station and the treaties between our peoples, you are now under arrest." Kethvar struggled to his feet, his pride warring with his fear. "You cannot arrest a Xanthari warrior," he growled. "We are bound by no human laws." "You are wrong," Captain Chen replied calmly. "The moment you struck Maya Collins, you declared war on every human in this sector. And we take that very seriously." As if summoned by her words, more humans began to appear in the marketplace. Shop owners, traders, engineers, and civilians all made their way through the crowd until dozens of humans surrounded the area where the fight had taken place. They said nothing, but their presence spoke louder than words. The alien spectators began to back away nervously. They had never seen humans act like this before. Usually humans kept to themselves and avoided confrontation. But now they moved with unity and purpose that was frightening to watch. Maya walked slowly over to where Jake stood with the Marines. Her face was swollen and bruised, but her eyes were clear and determined. "Thank you," she said simply. Jake nodded, still breathing hard from the fight. "Nobody hurts my people," he said. "Nobody." Captain Chen watched the crowd of aliens dispersing, many of them talking rapidly into communication devices. She knew that news of this incident would reach the highest levels of galactic government within hours. The balance of power in this sector was about to shift, and it had all started with one Xanthari warrior making the worst mistake of his life. Kethvar was placed in restraints and led away by the Marines. As they walked past Maya, he looked at her with something that might have been confusion or regret. She met his gaze steadily, showing no fear despite her injuries. The marketplace slowly began to return to normal, but everyone knew that something fundamental had changed. The humans had shown a side of themselves that few aliens had ever seen before. They were no longer just another species trying to find their place in the galaxy. They were protectors, and they would fight for their own. The news of the fight spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours, every major government had received reports about the incident on Nexus Prime. A human soldier had fought a Xanthari warrior to protect a young woman, and the Xanthari had lost. This was not supposed to be possible. The Galactic Federation Council called an emergency meeting on the capital world of Centauri Prime. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, their voices creating a noise like rushing water as they talked about what had happened. Ambassador Helen Carter sat at the human delegation table, reading through reports from Nexus Prime. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes, but those who knew her understood that she was as tough as steel when it came to protecting human interests. Across the hall, the Xanthari delegation occupied their traditional seats near the front. War Chief Thekmor was a massive creature, even larger than Kethvar, with scars covering his dark scales. He had led the Xanthari military forces for 20 years and had never been defeated in battle. His yellow eyes burned with anger as he watched the human ambassador. "This council will come to order," announced Speaker Veltar, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms. "We are here to discuss the incident that occurred on Nexus Prime Trade Station. War Chief Thekmor, you may present your case first." Thekmor stood up, his full height making him tower over most of the other delegates. When he spoke, his voice was like thunder rolling across mountains. "Honored delegates," he began, "one of our warriors has been gravely injured by a human soldier. Kethvar was simply defending himself when he was attacked without warning. The human showed no mercy and nearly killed a noble Xanthari warrior. We demand that this criminal be turned over to us for proper punishment." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Many of the delegates had heard rumors about what really happened, but the Xanthari version was very different from other reports. Ambassador Carter stood up slowly. She was much smaller than the Zenthari war chief, but her presence filled the room just as completely. Speaker Veltar honored delegates. She said in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the hall, "I would like to present the facts of this case, not the fiction that War Chief Thekmor has just shared with us." She pressed a button on her tablet, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. The screen showed security footage from Nexus Prime, taken from multiple angles around the marketplace. "This is what actually happened," Carter said. The footage showed Maya walking through the marketplace carrying her case. It showed her accidentally bumping into Kethvar and her immediate apology. Then it showed the Zenthari warrior striking her with full force, sending her flying into the fruit stand. The assembly hall fell completely silent as they watched Jake's explosive response. They saw him tackle Kethvar and begin the fight that would change everything. The footage showed every moment of the brutal combat, including Jake's refusal to give up despite his injuries. When the footage ended, Ambassador Carter looked around the hall at the shocked faces of the delegates. "Maya Collins is 19 years old," she said quietly. "She was carrying diplomatic documents to help with peace negotiations. She posed no threat to anyone. Kethvar struck her without warning and without cause, using enough force to kill most beings in this room." War Chief Thekmor's scales darkened with rage. "The human female showed disrespect by touching a Zenthari warrior. Our customs demanded a response." "Your customs," Carter replied, her voice growing cold, "do not give you the right to attempt murder on a neutral station, and you made one very serious mistake when you chose to attack her." The other delegates leaned forward in their seats. Something in the human ambassador's tone made them all nervous. "What mistake?" asked Councillor Zephyrin of the Valak Consortium, a species that had long been allied with the Zenthari. Carter pressed another button and the screen showed new footage. This time it was from the moments after the fight when Captain Chen arrived with her Marines. The delegates watched as dozens of humans appeared in the marketplace, surrounding the area with quiet determination. "You attacked one of our people," Carter said simply. "And humans do not forget. We do not forgive, and we do not abandon our own." She pressed the button again, and the screen showed a map of the galaxy. Red dots appeared on the map, marking human settlements and military bases. There were thousands of them scattered across hundreds of star systems. "There are over 2 billion humans living in this galaxy," Carter continued. "We have colonies on 600 worlds, and our ships patrol trade routes in every sector. Every single one of those humans now knows what happened to Maya Collins. Every single one of them is angry about it." The Zenthari war chief laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "You think we fear human anger? We are warriors born. We have conquered entire star systems. Have you?" Carter asked. She pressed the button once more, and the screen showed a different kind of map. This one showed military strength and ship movements across the galaxy. "Our intelligence reports indicate that the Zenthari military has approximately 50,000 warriors spread across 12 star systems. You have perhaps 200 warships of various sizes. This is impressive by most standards." The war chief's chest swelled with pride. "More than enough to crush any enemy." "Perhaps," Carter agreed. "But you are not facing just any enemy now. You are facing humanity, and humanity has some advantages that your warriors may not have considered." The screen changed again, showing human military installations. The numbers that appeared made several delegates gasp in shock. "The Terran Defense Corps has 3 million active soldiers," Carter announced. "We have 12,000 warships, including battle cruisers that can destroy entire fleets. We have orbital defense platforms around every major human world, and we have weapons that can crack planets in half." War Chief Thekmor's expression began to change. The arrogant confidence in his eyes was replaced by something that looked like concern. "But more importantly," Carter continued, "we have something that you do not understand. We have unity. When one human is threatened, all humans respond. When one human is hurt, all humans feel that pain. This is not just about Maya Collins anymore. This is about what happens to anyone who thinks they can hurt innocent people and get away with it." She walked closer to the Zenthari delegation, her eyes never leaving Thekmor's face. Your warrior made a choice when he struck Maya Collins. He chose to show the galaxy that the Zenthari believe they can hurt anyone they want without consequences. But he was wrong. There are always consequences. The screen showed footage from across human space. On world after world, human military forces were mobilizing. Ships were leaving port, soldiers were boarding transports, and weapons were being loaded onto carriers. This is happening right now, Carter said. Every human military unit in the galaxy has been placed on high alert. Our fleets are moving towards Zenthari space as we speak. Not to attack, but to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. Counselor Zephyrin of the Velak Consortium stood up suddenly. Ambassador Carter, surely you are not threatening war over a simple altercation? Carter turned to look at him, and her smile was colder than space itself. Counselor Zephyrin, your people have been allies of the Zenthari for over a century. You have profited from their mercenary work and their conquests. But I wonder if you have considered what will happen to your trade routes if human ships decide that Velak vessels are no longer welcome in our space. The Velak counselor's face went pale. Human space controlled some of the most important trade routes in the galaxy. If humans decided to blockade Velak ships, it would destroy their economy within months. You cannot blockade neutral space, Zephyrin protested. We can protect our people, Carter replied. And if that means keeping dangerous species away from human civilians, then that is what we will do. Other delegates began to whisper among themselves. The humans were not just threatening the Zenthari anymore. They were making it clear that anyone who supported violence against human civilians would face consequences. War Chief Techmore realized that the situation was spiraling out of his control. What had started as a simple demand for justice had become something much larger and more dangerous. What do you want? He asked, his voice much quieter than before. Ambassador Carter returned to her seat and looked at him calmly. We want the galaxy to understand that humans will protect innocent people, no matter what species they belong to. We want it understood that attacking civilians under human protection is not just an act of violence, it is an act of war. And we want Kethvar to stand trial for attempted murder. Never, Techmore growled. No Zenthari warrior will submit to alien justice. Then, you have made your choice, Carter said. But I should warn you that Lieutenant Jake Morrison is not the only human who will fight to protect the innocent. There are millions more just like him, and they are all waiting to see what you decide to do next. The assembly hall fell silent. Again. Every delegate understood that they were witnessing a turning point in galactic history. The humans had drawn a line in space, and they had made it clear that they would fight anyone who tried to cross it. 3 days after the council meeting, Dr. Aaron Blake stood in front of the largest gathering of alien representatives the galaxy had ever seen. The human scientist was not tall or impressive-looking, but his calm voice carried easily through the great assembly hall on Centauri Prime. Honored delegates, he began. You have asked me to explain why humans reacted so strongly to the incident on Nexus Prime. The answer is simple, but perhaps not easy to understand if you are not human. Dr. Blake was a xenopsychologist, someone who studied how different alien minds worked. He had spent years learning about various species and their behaviors. Now he was here to explain his own species to a room full of confused and worried aliens. Among humans, he continued, there are certain actions that trigger what we call protective instincts. These instincts are so deep and so strong that they override almost everything else, including fear for our own safety. In the Zenthari section, War Chief Techmore leaned forward in his seat. Since the council meeting, several allied species had quietly withdrawn their support for the Zenthari. Even his own warriors were beginning to question whether attacking the human had been wise. The most powerful of these instincts, Dr. Blake explained, is activated when innocent people are harmed. It does not matter if the innocent person is human or alien, young or old, male or female. When humans see someone who cannot defend themselves, being hurt by someone stronger, we react. He pressed a button and the screen behind him showed images from human history, pictures of humans fighting to protect others, risking their lives for strangers, standing up to enemies much larger than themselves. This reaction is not learned, Dr. Blake said. It is built into who we are as a species. A human who sees an innocent person being harmed will almost always try to help. even if it means putting themselves in danger. Counselor Nixara of the peaceful Moralian Republic raised one of her forearms. Dr. Blake, many species have protective instincts. What makes humans different? Dr. Blake smiled at the question. What makes humans different is the intensity of our response and our refusal to give up. When Lieutenant Morrison saw Maya Collins being attacked, his protective instincts took over completely. At that moment, stopping the threat to her became more important than his own life. The screen changed to show footage from the fight on Nexus Prime again. This time, Dr. Blake paused it at specific moments to make his points. Notice here, he said, pointing to a moment when Jake was clearly injured but still fighting. Lieutenant, Morrison has a broken arm and several deep cuts, but he continues to attack. This is not unusual behavior for a human in this situation. We have a saying, never give up, never surrender. It is more than just words to us. War Chief Thekmore stood up angrily. You make it sound like humans are better warriors than Zenthari, but your lieutenant barely defeated Kethvar, and only because Kethvar was not expecting such fury. Dr. Blake nodded calmly. You are correct, War Chief. In a normal fight between equals, a Zenthari warrior would likely defeat a human soldier. You are stronger, faster, and better armed by nature. But this was not a normal fight. He clicked to another part of the footage, showing Jake's face during the battle. Even through the blood and pain, there was something in his eyes that made several aliens shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was a human fighting to protect someone else, Dr. Blake explained. In such situations, humans become much more dangerous than they appear. We ignore pain, we ignore fear, and we use everything around us as a weapon. Most importantly, we do not stop until the threat is eliminated or we are dead. Commander Rick Hayes of the Terran Defense Corps stood up. From the human section, he was a large man with scars on his face and hands, clearly someone who had seen many battles. Dr. Blake speaks the truth, Hayes said in a rough voice. I have fought beside humans in dozens of conflicts across the galaxy. I have seen soldiers with broken bones continue fighting. I have seen humans with fatal wounds still trying to protect their comrades. It is who we are. He walked to the center of the hall, moving with the confident stride of a veteran warrior. Several alien delegates moved back as he approached, instinctively, recognizing the danger in his manner. But the war chief is also right about one thing, Hayes continued. In a fair fight, most aliens could probably defeat most humans. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the toughest. He paused and looked around the hall at all the different alien faces watching him. But we are the most stubborn, he said with a cold smile. And when someone hurts our people, fair fights go out the window. Hayes pressed his own button and the screen showed military footage from human conflicts across the galaxy. Battles where humans had been outnumbered, outgunned, and facing superior enemies. This is from the Battle of Kepler Station, Hayes explained as the footage showed human ships attacking a much larger alien fleet. Pirates had captured a civilian transport with 300 humans aboard. The pirates had better ships, more weapons, and defensive positions. They should have won easily. The footage showed human ships diving straight into enemy fire, taking massive damage but never turning away. One by one, the pirate ships were destroyed by humans who refused to retreat. The pirates offered to negotiate, Hayes continued. They said they would release half the prisoners if we stopped attacking. Do you know what our response was? War Chief Thekmore shook his head, though his expression suggested he was beginning to understand. We told them to release all the prisoners, or we would destroy every ship they had, Hayes said. When they refused, we did exactly that. Not one pirate survived, and every single human prisoner was rescued. The screen changed to show more examples. Humans fighting impossible odds to save colonies from disaster. Human soldiers holding defensive positions against overwhelming enemy forces. Human rescue teams diving into dangerous situations to save alien civilians. You see, Hayes explained, humans do not fight just to win. We fight to protect. And when we are protecting someone, we become something that even we do not fully understand. Dr. Blake returned to the center of the hall. This brings us to the most important point, he said. What happened on Nexus Prime was not just about one fight between two individuals. It was about what that fight represented. He looked directly at War Chief Thekmor. When Kethvar struck Maya Collins, he sent a message to every human in the galaxy. He said that the Zenthari believe they can hurt our people without consequences. That message was unacceptable to us. The screen now showed footage from across human space over the past week, military bases preparing for action, civilian populations organizing support, and most importantly, humans from every walk of life volunteering for military service. Since the incident, Dr. Blake announced, over 1 million humans have volunteered to join the military. They are not soldiers or warriors by training. They are teachers, farmers, engineers, and artists. But they all have one thing in common. He paused to let his words sink in. They all believe that Maya Collins could have been their daughter, their sister, or their friend, and they all want to make sure that nothing like this happens again. Counselor Zephyrin of the Valak Consortium looked pale as he stood up. Dr. Blake, surely you cannot be suggesting that humans would go to war over one incident. Dr. Blake's expression became very serious. Counselor Zephyrin, humans have gone to war for much less than this. We once fought a war that lasted 4 years and cost millions of lives because we could not agree on whether some people should be slaves. We have fought wars to protect people we had never met, in places we had never been, simply because it was the right thing to do. Commander Hayes nodded grimly. The Zenthari made a mistake when they chose to test human resolve. They thought, we were weak because we prefer peace. They thought we would not fight because we try to avoid violence. They were wrong on both counts. The screen showed the current position of human fleets across the galaxy. Dozens of battle groups were moving towards strategic positions, ready to respond to any threat against human civilians. We do prefer peace, Hayes continued. But we are very good at war when peace is not possible. And we have learned something over the centuries of human conflict that other species may not understand. War Chief Thekmor's voice was much quieter. When he asked, "What have you learned?" Hayes looked directly at him and his smile was not friendly. We have learned that the best way to protect innocent people is to make sure that anyone who hurts innocents pays a price so high that others will think twice before trying it again. The hall fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Every alien delegate understood that they were no longer just discussing the incident on Nexus Prime. They were discussing the future of galactic civilization and humanity's place in it. Dr. Blake returned to his seat, but his final words echoed through the hall long after he sat down. You wanted to understand why humans reacted so strongly to what happened to Maya Collins. Now you know. The question you must ask yourselves is this: what are you going to do with that knowledge? 6 months later, Maya Collins stood in the Great Assembly Hall on Centauri Prime, but this time she was not a victim. She wore the dark blue uniform of a diplomatic courier, and a small scar on her cheek was the only sign of what had happened to her on Nexus Prime. Today, she was here to witness something that had never happened before in galactic history. The new Terran Accords were about to be signed. These agreements would give humans special authority to protect civilian populations throughout neutral space. After months of debate, argument, and negotiation, 43 different species had agreed to the terms. Maya looked around the hall at all the alien delegates. Many of them had been here during the emergency sessions after her attack. Now they were here to formally recognize what everyone already knew. Humans had become the protectors of the innocent in this galaxy. Ambassador Helen Carter sat at the main table with the signing document spread in front of her. Next to her was Captain Jake Morrison, recently promoted for his actions on Nexus Prime. His left arm still moved stiffly from his injuries, but he had refused medical retirement. He was now the commander of the newly formed Human Protection Corps. The signing will now begin, announced Speaker Veltar. Ambassador Carter, you may proceed. Carter picked up an elegant writing instrument made from materials gathered across the galaxy. Each species had contributed something to its creation, symbolizing their agreement to work together for the protection of civilians. Today we establish a new principle in galactic law, Carter said as she signed her name. No longer will the strong be allowed to prey upon the weak without consequence. No longer will innocent people suffer simply because they cannot defend themselves. One by one. The alien delegates came forward to add their signatures. The Moralian Republic signed first, their peaceful nature making them natural allies in this cause. The Andromedans followed, grateful for human protection of their trade routes. Even some species that had initially opposed the accords eventually came forward to sign. But not everyone was happy about the new agreements. In the Zenthari section, War Chief Tekmor sat alone. Most of his former allies had abandoned him after the incident on Nexus Prime. The Velak Consortium had signed a separate peace treaty with humanity, rather than risk economic warfare. Other species that had once hired Zenthari mercenaries were now hiring human security forces instead. After the signing ceremony, Maya walked through the halls of the government complex. She had meetings with representatives from several species who wanted to understand more about human protective instincts. It was strange how her worst day had led to her becoming an important voice in galactic politics. As she turned a corner, she almost ran into someone she had hoped never to see again. Kethvar stood in the hallway, no longer wearing the armor of a Zenthari warrior. He looked older and somehow smaller than she remembered. The trial had stripped him of his warrior status, and he now worked as a common laborer on Centauri Prime. Maya Collins, he said quietly, using her name for the first time. I have been hoping to speak with you. Maya felt her heart speed up, but she did not step back. The scared 19-year-old girl from Nexus Prime was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more confident. What do you want, Kethvar? She asked. The former warrior looked down at his hands, which no longer bore the ceremonial claws of his rank. I want to apologize, he said. What I did to you was wrong. I have had many months to think about this, and I understand now that my actions brought shame not just to myself, but to my entire people. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but all she saw was genuine regret and something that looked like fear. Why are you apologizing now? She asked. Is it because you lost everything or because you actually understand what you did wrong? Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. Both, he admitted. I was raised to believe that strength was the only thing that mattered, that weaker beings existed only to serve the strong. But watching what happened after I struck you, I learned that I was wrong about many things. He looked up at her with eyes that no longer held the arrogance she remembered. I learned that humans are not weak, even though you do not have claws or armor. I learned that protecting others can make someone stronger than any weapon. And I learned that when you hurt an innocent person, you do not just face that person, you face everyone who cares about them. Maya nodded slowly. Yes, you do. And now the whole galaxy knows that. The Zenthari way is dying, Kethvar continued. Fewer species hire us as mercenaries. Our young warriors see what humans have accomplished through protection instead of conquest, and they ask why we cannot do the same. Some have even asked to join your protection corps. This surprised Maya. Zenthari warriors want to join humans? A few, Kethvar confirmed. They say that there is more honor in protecting the weak than in serving the strong. Your Captain Morrison has agreed to consider their applications, though they must prove they have truly changed. Maya thought about Jake and how he had risked everything to protect her. He would be a good judge of whether former enemies could become allies. What will you do now? She asked. Kethvar shrugged, a gesture that looked strange on his large frame. I will work. I will try to earn forgiveness from those I have wronged, and perhaps someday I will find a way to protect others instead of hurting them. As he turned to leave, Maya called out to him, Kethvar. He stopped and looked back. I forgive you, she said simply. What you did was wrong, and I will carry the scars forever. But I forgive you because that is what humans do. We believe people can change and become better than they were. For a moment, the former warrior's composure broke, and Maya saw something she never expected to see from a Zenthari. Tears gathered in his yellow eyes. Thank you, he whispered, and then he was gone. Later that evening, Maya stood on an observation deck looking out at the stars. The signing ceremony had been broadcast across the galaxy, and she knew that millions of beings had watched humans officially become the protectors of civilian space. Jake Morrison joined her at the viewing window. His promotion had made him one of the most powerful military officers in human space, but he still looked like the same man who had fought a Zenthari warrior to protect her. "How do you feel about all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the stars, where human patrol ships were already beginning their new duties. Maya touched the scar on her cheek thoughtfully. 6 months ago, I was just a courier carrying documents. Now I am part of something that has changed the entire galaxy. It feels overwhelming sometimes. "You started something important," Jake said. "Not by getting hurt, but by getting back up afterward. When the aliens saw you stand up after Kethavar hit you, they began to understand what humans are really made of." Maya smiled. "I had a good example to follow. You taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to stay down." Jake nodded. "And you taught me that protecting others is not just about fighting. It is about showing them that someone cares enough to fight for them." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were patrolling trade routes and protecting civilians. Somewhere out there, species that had once lived in fear of stronger neighbors now knew that humans would come if they called for help. The communication device on Jake's belt chimed softly. He checked the message and smiled. "What is it?" Maya asked. "Report from the Outer Rim," Jake said. "A group of pirates tried to attack a civilian transport carrying Moralian refugees. 3 human ships responded to the distress call. The pirates surrendered without firing a shot when they realized they were facing humans." Maya laughed. "I guess word is getting around." "Word is definitely getting around," Jake agreed. "The galaxy is learning that humans keep their promises. When we say we will protect innocent people, we mean it." As they prepared to leave the observation deck, Maya looked back at the stars one more time. 6 months ago, she had been the victim of senseless violence. Tonight, she was a symbol of how humans respond to injustice. The scar on her face would always remind her of that terrible day on Nexus Prime, but it would also remind her of what came after. It would remind her that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the most important changes. The galaxy was a safer place now, not because humans were the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced species. It was safer because humans had made a simple promise and backed it up with action. Nobody hurts innocent people without consequences. And as Maya looked out at the stars, she knew that humans would keep that promise, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Because that was what humans did. They protected those who could not protect themselves, and they never gave up. The girl who had been knocked down on Nexus Prime was gone. In her place stood a woman who would spend her life making sure that what happened to her would never happen to anyone else. And in the depths of space, human ships continued their patrol, carrying that same promise to every corner of the galaxy.